Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Professionals podcast. Our guest today is none other than Iqbal Nasim. Assalamu alaikum, Iqbal.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Thank you very much for accepting the invitation. Basically one of the points that triggered me to record this episode with you was that I followed one of the courses that you give. The Last Day Leader course, which was very insightful. Basically, your mission is to deliver transformational educational experiences. Could you give us a quick overview, sharing your background with us and how you came at the point where you doubled down on that specific mission?
Sure. Okay, so I was born and brought up in London, the oldest of three siblings. I sort of studied at university level, studied economics and management at Cambridge University. Whilst growing up, I excelled in sort of academic studies, but also spent a lot of time learning Quranic Arabic. And then at university, I started memorizing the Quran formally and finished that. After graduation, I went away for a few months. And finished memorizing the Quran and continued my Arabic studies. And then I started my sort of work life, if you like, in investment banking as an equity research analyst, just researching and providing investment advice with regards to companies listed on a stock exchange in the oil and gas sector. So I did that for about 5 years, and then I left that. I was trying to look for something more meaningful and purposeful to do. And eventually that led me into a position where I was sort of running the National Zakat Foundation. So the organization had just been sort of set up. And then I came in as the first full-time sort of staff member to run the organization, which I then ended up doing for the next 10 years. So that was from the beginning of 2012 until the end of 2021. National Zakat Foundation is an organization that focuses on the local collection and distribution of zakat, as well as educating people about the principles of zakat and helping them to accurately calculate zakat as well. Whilst I was at National Zakat Foundation, towards the end, I started, I developed and started teaching a prayer course called Transform My Prayer. The aim of this was to help people improve the quality and consistency of their salah.
Yep.
So I very much enjoyed teaching that program. And actually, when I reflected on the National Zakat Foundation experience, I realized that what I enjoyed there was, again, sort of reading about and understanding zakat, conceptualizing it, and then communicating, educating people about it. But in a way that was, I suppose, a bit different to maybe what people were used to, both with salah and zakat, just trying to sort of do away with, a lot of the jargon and even technical terms when they're not necessary, but just try to communicate things in plain English in a way that's relatable to people now, and actually relates to an overall, or is part of an overall understanding of, like a vision for Islam in society, let's say. Yeah. So I'm trying to get people to think about their individual actions in the context of not just their own faith and practice, but also in the context of Islam as a phenomenon in their community and society, and how their actions can, should, and could impact basically the broader picture for Islam in the future of Islam wherever they are. So then eventually I decided, okay, I'm going to dedicate myself fully to this sort of education teaching, and so I just run my sort of own independent education platform just under my own name. And then I have 3 programs. So one is Transform My Prayer. The other is Last Day Leader. So these are kind of shorter term programs, maybe 10 hours of content, where, Transform My Prayer is about, getting quality and coherence in your prayer. And Last Day Leader, I think, is about getting quality and coherence in your life, generally, and trying to make sure that your life is oriented towards Allah and is basically is reflective of, the things that we say we believe, right? So if we believe in God, we believe in the last day, and we believe that Islam, meaning submission to him, is not just, again, a personal practice, but it's a cause that needs supporting, if you like, then to find our way of doing that. And then I also run a monthly, not monthly, but a a weekly Quran class,
Yeah.
Club Revelation. So that's an ongoing sort of membership style Quran program
Yeah.
where we're just working through sequentially, passages of the Quran. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, like I said, I followed the Last Day Leader course and it was very insightful. I would like to touch upon some of the main themes of the course. Of course, we
Okay.
won't be able to do it justice in a conversation of an hour, but I'd just like to very broadly touch upon the main themes discussed in the specific course. Before we dive into the themes, I think it's interesting to link it to your personal experience. Because while you were in investment banking, you made the decision to leave the investment banking and to move into working as a volunteer for National Zakat Foundation. Like you said, it wasn't a discussion about whether the income was permissible or not, but it was a nagging feeling you felt that you weren't achieving your utmost potential. Could you describe the nagging feeling? Because I think it will be something that a lot of us experience. Could you put it into words? What was the feeling you experienced?
Um, I mean, yeah, it's difficult, isn't it, to describe feelings in a way that's maybe even accurate. And obviously, at that
Yeah,
time, it was a long time ago. But I think,
sure.
broadly, I would say it was. It's the kind of, you know, the kind of natural feeling or intuition that we have in any situation where we feel something isn't quite right.
Hmm.
It might start out with uncertainty. We're not sure exactly what isn't right, but we know that something doesn't feel quite right or in order. Um, and that, and also that, one's in a way where there's not necessarily a full alignment between the outward and the inward. Um, when I say that, what I mean is that, inwardly we may have various aspirations, ambitions, beliefs, convictions, and it's not always the case that we give full expression to those things through our actions and activities.
Yeah.
Um, and so, for me, it was, what I thought to myself is, look, two things, which then I think are the key, uh, some of the key barriers that we address in the Last Day Leader program, which is that on one hand, I thought to myself, if I take money out of the equation, what would I do with my life? Right?
Hmm.
It's not that money isn't important. Money is important, obviously, and it has its place. But I didn't want it to be the sort of the sole or the overriding objective of what I'm doing.
Sure. Sure.
Because that you just felt like at that point, well, you could just do anything basically. But it's like if me that to have that as the overriding objective in a way that I couldn't relate to any higher purpose didn't feel appropriate. So I sort of tried to think to myself that, okay, look, if I didn't need them, if I didn't need the money, or if I took money out of the equation, like, is this how is things that I'm doing currently? Is this how I want to spend my life, basically?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think there's something about us and maybe for most people it comes later on in life, maybe, I don't know. But I think the idea here is to value time more than money from the very beginning,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And so if you see your time as precious, and then you put onto that, our accountability
Yeah.
and the fact that we don't have actually, not only is your time more precious than money, time is a lot more scarce
Yes.
in many ways than we
Yes.
think. So I think the problem perhaps is that we think time is abundant
Mm.
and money is scarce.
Mhm.
But maybe it's the other way around. Actually, maybe resources are actually abundant in ways that we don't expect, but it's our time that's scarce, and we should be very careful about how we're utilizing that. And because we have to account for it too,
Yeah.
we have to account for the way in which we use whatever time we have, our skills, resources, etc. So I think it was just always that, just trying to the fact that, okay, well, now let me think about, am I leading the kind of life, the ultimate or the optimal kind of life? Like, am I doing justice to my potential? And if I'm not, then the nagging feeling is, well, how am I going to account for myself? So it's a little bit like somebody who's doing something, they know they're not quite, doing the best that they can. And it's almost like, it's like the feeling that somebody might have before an exam, when they know they're not preparing well or not preparing enough, and they really, um, so it's that, you feel therefore you just feel uncomfortable, right? Like, yeah, unprepared, uncomfortable, etc. So I think it was that.
Yeah, and I think that an important distinction that you made in the course as well was the difference between suboptimal and optimal, and and one of the main questions you posed as well was, if you had 6 months to live, what would you
Mm,
do differently? And I think
mm,
that's a question that exposes a lot of the underlying ambitions that we might have that we don't work on, and yeah, what I find an important note is, of course, that these changes can be made gradually, of course, because somebody might listen to this and say, okay, but do you advise me to leave my job then and to just go out and try to find my ambition? And by having that thought, you automatically close the door to what are the opportunities that I have. You did make that decision, of course, by leaving investment banking and moving into a whole other sector. What's the general advices you give regarding somebody feeling that their main that the way that they spend their time, that the way that they spend most of their time, which is often for us being work,
mm.
is suboptimal to what they should be doing? Um, what are some general advices you would give regarding that situation and finding like a more optimal way to spend your time?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very important that that if we feel that we shouldn't dismiss it, because I think it's very easy to dismiss the feeling, to tell yourself that you're being idealistic or unrealistic,
Yes.
um, that you're entertaining thoughts about possible alternatives to your current situation, that you shouldn't really be, maybe sometimes you might even, somebody might justify it, using some sort of more, I don't know, like a pious justification, which is, I should be grateful for what I have, so I shouldn't be, thinking alternatives, so this kind of thing. So what I say to people is, like, the first thing is, don't dismiss that inclination that you have, because I think it comes for a reason. And then I would say that you have to, regardless of what you sort of keep doing with your sort of your time, with the main amount of your time, or if you're in some sort of work or employment job that you not really, that isn't really you, like, you're fully satisfied with, then I would say, like, you just have to make sure you give it enough attention and carve out the time to keep thinking through and exploring the alternatives.
Mm.
Because what it is that, I would say it's quite common experience for me now, having had, these kinds of conversations with many people one to one and in a group
Yeah.
setting, where people might say that they're not particularly happy, or they don't consider what they're doing currently as the best thing. But then I would say to them, okay, well, let's assume let's assume that, you have all the resources that you need to take care of your sort of personal requirements. And let's also assume, you only have, that you only got, usually I would say nowadays, I would say, 3 years. Okay. And that's it.
Yeah.
You've got 3 years
Yeah.
basically,
Yeah.
to live, to contribute, to do whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
And I would say to them, well, what would you actually do then?
Yeah.
So I've taken care of the money problem, given them an urgency, but
Yes.
a long enough time to do something meaningful.
Yes.
Now, see, most people don't actually know the answer to that question. So you see, what the issue is that what that says is that they haven't actually allowed themselves enough time to think about what the actual optimal or the ultimate thing would be. And things only ever become possibilities for us when we actually want them enough, and
Yeah.
wanting them enough involves thinking about them enough, and therefore, and planning and praying and whatever. So I would say that's really important. That's actually in some ways the point of this program, of course, is to almost provide people the space in which to actually just, almost force themselves to go through a process of figuring out, like,
Mm.
what do I really want? Independent of the things that tend to hold people back. So I think that's really, really important and key. So doing that yourself, but doing that with others as well, and sharing that, and being open with people that you trust, friends, family, whatever, um, about your situation, and then getting the kind of help that you need, wherever you get it from, to help you think through, you know, um, if you like, this optimal life design. So you've
Yeah.
got to design the alternative, right? It's like, if someone's living in an accommodation that they don't like, and they want to improve the accommodation,
Yeah.
or they want to move to another accommodation, okay, fine. Whilst you're living in your current accommodation that you're not so happy with, you need to put the time into design the alternative before you can build the alternative, whether that's improving your own place or going to some other place or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's that simple, really,
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but most, I think a lot of people just don't do it. Just don't do
Yeah.
that much. Can't even articulate the alternative, let alone
Mm,
full.
mm.
view the alternative.
Yeah, I like the way that you put it. So it's basically a process that you need to get into, which doesn't require immediate, urgent, very big action.
Yeah.
But it's a process where you dive into thinking about these themes and carving out like a vision for yourself, and then looking at the best way to work towards the ideal situation, instead of thinking that it's okay, I need to make one radical decision and then from there the door is open and I'm at the desired situation where I'm in. And I saw a LinkedIn post of yours as well, which I found really interesting, where you said that um, before arriving at clarity you need to go to a phase of chaos. And I think that sums it up very well. And if we now make like a step into one of the main themes of the course, you started by basically describing the human condition, and you gave a few points about the human condition based on basically the principles that we deduct from the Quran. So first, maybe it's better if I just allow you um, to name these and shortly address them. What's the human condition? If we look at what the Quran says about it.
Yeah, so when I say human condition, what I mean is basically the situation that we find ourselves in. Like, what are the one way to say it is almost like, what are the parameters of the game, if you like, that we're in?
Yeah.
You know, it's like when you play a particular sport, you know, there's sort of you know, there's certain rules, there's certain boundaries according to whichever kind of game or sport it is. You need to know all of those kind of things, and then you know you can't lose sight of them. Okay, so if you're playing football and you basically you lose sight of the fact that here's the line, right?
Yeah.
Then obviously you often you can't, it doesn't work for you nor for others. So again, it's a very simple analogy, but actually when you apply it to our situation, it's very helpful, because there are certain very sort of fixed rules and parameters, if you like, or boundaries, certain rules of the game, which in our case, it's very easy to forget, like what game you're actually playing, basically, what game you should be playing, if you know what I mean, right? So the fact that, for example, simply the things that we believe, we say we believe, but to have internalized them fully is a different thing. Yes. You know, the fact that we are created, the fact that we are placed very deliberately in a particular time or place or context, the fact that we are, obviously will certainly die and be resurrected and be held accountable, and the fact that life is shorter, than even the blink of an eye, right? When you're actually going to look back at it. Like all of these perspective giving things. So it's like when we're going through life just on a day-to-day basis, as we see and observe and interact with our environment, are we actually like perceiving and seeing everything through this lens, through almost call it the Quranic lens, or almost the divine lens or view, meaning that our vision or perspective is similar to the divine perspective in terms of what the situation actually is. So one like useful sort of couple of verses just on this is where, just to give this idea of how Allah sees things and people see things and how they can be different, is that where he says regarding the final sort of hour and the day of judgment, etc.
Yes.
He says, indeed they see it to be far away, but we see it to be close, right? Meaning those who are deny it or whatever, they sort of see it as something a remote or something distant, but we see it to be close. So then the believer, if the believer wants to align their perspective with God's perspective, then they'll also see it to be close, and therefore that will affect the way in which they think, act, behave, etc., etc. So I think it's these things. It's the shortness of life. It's the accountability. It's the fact that the stakes are really high at the end of it all. And it's the fact that the world is full of distractions, and the world is full of things that will occupy us, we will be led to believe by ourselves, by other people, by the devil, whoever, right? We will be led to believe that certain things matter than they actually do. And we will be led to believe that and then we'll pursue those things and we'll put energy and time into those things. But then actually it will be probably difficult for a lot of people to justify, why does this particularly matter if you also believe all of these things about your reality?
Yes.
You know, what's the coherence? So for me, I think, you know what it is? I think the way to summarize, I think what I, you know, again, it's a simple thing, right? But I think the way to summarize like what I generally am trying to do with all of these different topics is say, okay, here's a principle or here's an idea, whatever. Like, are we actually living it? You know, and how do you actually live it? And let's not take for granted that we are. So whether that's with the prayer, whether it's with zakah, whether it's with, you know, what are you doing with your time, your life, your skills, etc., how you're seeing the world, you know, what occupies your time and energy, all these things. That's really what it is. So that's what I say the human condition. There's an urgency, there's an accountability, and therefore there needs to be very careful choice making and decision making about what we do.
And so the urgency and the accountability and the stakes that are so high should urge us to develop a vision and develop a vision for what we would like to be achieved in the world and what we would like to contribute to. Or I wanted to ask this question. So in developing the vision, when you look at the courses that you provide, next to Last Day Leader, you have the Club Revelation, which is basically diving in the Quran and reflecting on the themes and the verses in the Quran, and the Transform My Prayer, which focuses on the prayer. So would you say that all three of these are an integral part of the journey? And how do they interlink?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you can look at it in different ways. I generally now what I do is I basically I put things in this context of this overall framework of what I call like the true believer, you know? So in the Quran, you have the idea of Allah describes the people who are true believers, you know, and describes what their characteristics are. So I like this idea because basically, you know, even Allah distinguishes between people's claims and the realities, and then the realities are based on certain qualities.
Yeah.
And then those qualities are lots of different things, including the way in which we engage with the Quran, including our prayer, including this idea of striving for God's cause, but also other things in terms of more mindset things. You know, the having conviction, having courage, not being afraid of other than God, character, certain character traits as well, you know, these kinds of things. So for me, like within these things, I suppose I've picked, look, Salah as the prime way in which we communicate with our Lord. Revelation, the prime way in which he communicates with us. And then this leadership thing, the Last Day Leader, is an idea of, okay, well, how am I actually spending, what am I doing, you know, like, and how do I, what constitutes like optimal action, basically. And I think that, yeah, like just going from that human condition thing, like maybe it's a jump for a person to understand why do you go from the human condition thing to this idea of vision. But the point is this, is that if life is so short, if we need to live for our Lord, and we appreciate that worshiping God does not just involve remembrance and prayer and, you know, these kinds of things, you know, praise, but also represents like true or if you like, complete worship or service to our Lord, involves trying to work towards a certain social outcome that is reflective of what he would like. So there's a way that Allah wants society to be.
Yeah.
Okay. Certain qualities, certain characteristics, certain parameters, etc. So we need to just look at the societies in which we're in and say, okay, where are they relative to what God wants from us and what's in our interest, actually, because those two are the same thing, right? And how can we move the current society from where it is to where it's supposed to be? And if you think about it, that's what all prophets were there to do. You know, they were there to take people from paganism or whatever other, you know, sort of, whatever religious or faith culture or whatever, bring it to a simple, pure monotheism, but also to improve the social, economic, you know, sort of situation and bring justice and fairness and equity to the ways in which people are dealing with each other, right? So when we look around and, you know, in our own communities and societies, especially in, say, Western Europe, which is our, you know, shared context, okay, like there are just so many, I mean, you know, there's no end of, you know, of the list of problems and issues and things that starting with, obviously, people's move away from God generally, or faith, as well as then all of the other effects, you know, and damaging effects in people's lives, societies, families, whatever, that we have a role in improving. So we need to have a narrative. We need to have a we need to have a way to organize ourselves to contribute. And that's then where this idea of vision comes in, because it basically says, like, here's the current situation around me, but actually there's a better one that I should be working towards and that Allah wants us to all to work towards. And I just find my piece of that puzzle, and I just do my part to work, to improve this particular part.
Yes, yes. Yeah, so it's basically, how can I be of support in this mission, in this general mission that we share, and then finding your specific domain that allows you to do the best work and work in the most optimal way. And one of the frameworks that you used in discovering what our ideal domain can be is the Ikigai framework. Can you expand a little on the Ikigai framework? Because I think it's very useful for people to think about what their contribution can be.
Yeah, so Ikigai, it just means a reason for being. And basically, the framework just involves 4 overlapping circles. And the idea is to try to find the intersection between all 4 circles. So the 4 circles are, what the world needs, what I love, what I'm good at, and how I can be paid or sustained. Okay, so people can overlap between 2 of these or 3 of them, but ideally all 4 of them. Because if you're doing something that the world needs, meaning you're solving some problem, therefore you're actually having some impact, therefore you are necessarily contributing to a better future in some way, a brighter vision than is the case right now. And if you love doing that work and you're effective and skilled at doing the work and it's sustaining you, then there's no gaps. I mean, what's missing from a person's life then, you see? Whereas you take one of those out or 2 of them out, lots of people are doing what they're good at and they've been paid for, but they don't really love it. And it's not necessarily fulfilling a social purpose or fulfilling a purpose that really matters to them, so you can be fulfilling a social purpose and you can be paid for it and you might be good at it, but you might not really enjoy it or love it. So maybe it looks like you're doing a great thing, but maybe it's not the best thing you can do, because when any one of these is missing, there's a problem. If you're not really fulfilling a social need or problem, then you have this kind of feeling of uselessness. It's probably driven by more selfish criteria. If you're not doing something you love, you won't be able to sustain it in the same way. If you're not so effective at it, then you're not like leveraging your best skills. So you're having a less than effective kind of outcomes. And if you can't be sustained to do the thing that you do, then you're going to limit the amount of time you can actually give to it in most people's circumstances. Yeah. And therefore you may end up being in a situation where you make less of a contribution than you can, or that you need to, or that you might in some cases end up giving up altogether, or not even starting properly fully. So it's a very useful framework, I think. And the only way we adapt this framework for this course is to put all 4 circles within one big circle, which is what does God want, basically. So we're always looking at it through that lens as well. So we're thinking about the problems in the world and the things that we want to contribute to through that lens. We understand that what I love is the way that Allah has created me, and He's given me certain passions, inclinations, etc. He's given me certain skills, competencies, etc. And also not forgetting that He Himself provides. So when you think about it in that way, it's quite comprehensive, and then you can just work through each of these things and start to find some sort of alignment, hopefully, to think about what to do.
Yeah, and what I'm really interested in getting your thoughts about is basically one of the criticisms that is given to the millennial generation is that we often, when we go into the workforce, we try to find all of these characteristics in our work. And one of the criticisms is that we are attaching too high of expectations to our work, because work is there to basically sustain our financial needs. So I think a lot of people, when they hear about this framework and they hear about working towards a mission and a vision, they immediately think that they need to fulfill this mission by replacing their work, because their work consumes a lot of time currently in their day-to-day lives. While like we just spoke about, the practical gradual steps you can take in working towards the ideal life design for your own situation. So I would like to get your thoughts on this. When working towards basically performing or doing work within the Ikigai framework, I assume that there's a transition you can or you need to go through, where in the beginning you might have to do a side project which is a passion of yours, which ticks all of the three boxes, but you're not able to sustain yourself with it, and then work towards a situation where you are able to sustain yourself with that. What are your thoughts regarding this?
Yeah, exactly. So it's a gradual process to transition from wherever you are now to wherever you want to get to.
Yeah.
And the point is, number one is identify or at least establish a hypothesis of what the ideal thing is. Okay, so what is a kind of thing? So I say to people that the first thing you should worry about is the intersection between what does the world need, meaning what's a problem that I want to help solve? What do I love? What am I good at? So deal with these first, and then start basically, even if voluntarily, whatever, right? Just get going. So even in like a business startup kind of situation, people often try for very, very, cheap or free, some sort of MVP, minimum viable product, something that they can get going, something to, to test basically their hypothesis to see how it goes for them, how it goes for others, and just to learn from that experience. So yes, get started. And then the thing is this, is that what I say to people is that, sustainability and income comes through creating value, adding value. All right. The reason why people are paid wages for in the context of employment is because the employer and the employee essentially have come, to some sort of agreement, about the value that can be contributed and what that's worth. Okay. The point is that, but then the question is like, is that the value that I'm now adding, the effect that I'm bringing into the world, okay, through this particular organization, like, is that the kind of value that I feel I was, sort of most created to, to sort of bring about, rather than I should look deeper within and think about what Allah wants from me and then say, okay, well, actually, this is the kind of value I want to bring into the world. And if it is valuable, then resources will come to support that one way or the other, whether that's from customers or beneficiaries, or supporters, donors, investors, or some combination of these things. People part with money because they see value. That's the same whether it's a donation or a purchase, right? So or an investment. So that's it. So if a person can become somebody who adds value, and my thing is that if you're genuinely solving people's needs in a way that you love and you're actually good at that, well, and you find out what that is, like, that by definition becomes the greatest value that you can add. Now the only difference is that sometimes in those cases, then you might need to wait a little bit longer until you are able to deliver that value, communicate the value, deliver the value, and then for it to be seen or felt enough before then people start to part with the resources, if you like, in order to, like, in exchange for that value, let's say. Whereas, an employer might be ready right now to pay X amount of money for this particular input. But then oftentimes, this is the funny thing about it. It's like, some people, for example, I don't know, they become like, I don't know, some sort of tax accountant or something at some XYZ accountancy firm. They become sort of specialist in this area, whatever. It's like, I really struggle to believe, right, that intuitively, like before the opportunity presented itself, in that way, does somebody inside of themselves, like, think, a lot of the people who do that, I don't think they independently decided this is what I want to do, and then went out looking for those opportunities. Right. So is it the question? This is the question. Have our career choices or work choices, life choices, been more pull than push? Because I think if they've been more pull, meaning they've just pulled on us and we've just sort of decided, yeah, fine, we sort of settled for this or that or the other, then, there's probably lots of thinking that we didn't do before going that. Whereas if we try to be a bit more independent in our thinking, independent of any social expectations, even family expectations, whatever, status kind of considerations, justifying, this education or that education or whatever, and then independently think about who am I, what's the best I can do, and then construct that, and then go out with a view of that and sort of push onto the world what I want, if you like, and see what I could get in return for that. It's going to be a better path in the long run.
Yes, yes, yes. Okay, that's very insightful, and I think a very practical way to get people started, because I think you can have I think they call it analysis paralysis.
Yeah,
So you just spend just most of the time just thinking about what you want to do, instead
yeah.
of getting going and just starting small.
Start adding value. That's it. Start adding value,
And
even if it's to
yeah.
one person. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, and then build it up from there indeed. Um, so that's I think a very important note. Um, um, yeah, what I find interesting maybe to give people, because I like to make the podcast as practical as possible, and a lot of the theoretic concepts I would urge and encourage the listeners to follow the course, the Last Day Leader course, because that's where you really get a good grasp of the theoretic concepts. But to make a slightly more practical approach, like you said in your LinkedIn post, the process to clarity is oftentimes preceded by a period of chaos.
Yeah.
Um, can you describe to us what this process of chaos looks like, to basically give people, realistic expectations of what the process looks like, and not for them to feel like they're not doing a good job of being in the process? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just a lot of uncertainty, It's a lot of uncertainty. It's like being in the fog, or, being in a situation where you're traveling from here to there. You have an idea of the end point, but you just feel like you don't know the next turn. You don't know where to go next. So you feel a kind of maybe a desperation and uncertainty. Your patience is tested. And again, you can sort of give up, right? And you can just sort of go back to where you were before, or just not bother. Okay. So I think that that's it. So the point about the chaos is there will always be that chaos, the uncertainty, etc. And basically, it's just a question of whether we want to, or whether we're prepared to battle through it sufficiently or not. So it's not just, you only get to the clarity really when I think you've battled through the chaos, not just being in the chaos. Because we'll all be in that. And I think there's something about there's something about um, if we have a certain sort of stability, or a level of certainty in our lives, which has not actually been fully kind of thought through, it's like, you haven't exposed yourself to higher or different kind of possibilities, then, that is it might feel kind of comfortable in the near term, but eventually that will be, like you said, that nagging feeling will come at some point, sort of in the extreme, will come like, on someone's deathbed, or even in the hereafter, like someone will look back and then have regret. So the regret is obviously the worst feeling. And so the idea is to try, I think a lot of all of this is about preempting situations that will cause us regret, essentially. And so to live a life where we are minimizing regret, simply as that. So I think that, it does require a lot of patience. So whether it is a kind of particular idea or a concept or something intellectually that we're trying to get our head around, whether it is something which is to do with more practical terms, how we're going to solve a particular practical problem, whether we are confronting the fears about things that we want to do not being realistic enough, like all of these things can feel very difficult at times, and that's where it's really important for us to then show, this is where then the private, or the more personal connection with our Lord becomes like critically important, and actually I think further develops. I actually think that somebody's individual relationship with their Lord, sort of, there's a ceiling to how far it can go if challenges, if tests, if aspiration to a higher, goals, like aren't there, if someone's just sort of coasting along, it's just not the same, It's not the same until either you create situations where you are having to push yourself to a different level, or situations are thrust upon you, where you have to, you're forced to kind of do that. So I think it's that, in those situations, the last thing I'll just say is that what's really important is, this is where the vision part becomes really important. And then, or to put it simply in another way, like, remember why you started. Like, why did somebody start thinking or doing something that they felt was going to be more meaningful? Why? Because they wanted to do the best, right? They wanted to be the best that they could be as far as their Lord was concerned. They wanted to aspire they were worried about their accountability and thinking, okay, how can I actually, like prove my loyalty and my devotion to my Lord? So these are all noble and good things. And so when somebody has constructed some sort of objective, and if the objective remains noble, it remains a sincere one, and it remains a good one, then we have to like keep our eyes on that objective, or your eyes on the prize, so to speak, so that we continue just to work through the uncertainties, the difficulties, and the obstacles that we face in the moment.
Yeah, and I think it's a very nice a link that we can make, because you said the basically your personal relationship with your Lord increases during that period, because of course you're facing more uncertainty, so you flee towards the provider of what we have. And this was a domain I wanted to explore with you as well. We know the often cited verse that the person that will basically come on the day of resurrection, basically none of what they bring will be of benefit except them coming with a clean heart or a sound heart. And this can be overlooked, of course, during the process, when you are being too focused on basically the praxis and on the practical steps that you're taking and that you need to take, and not focusing enough on basically cleansing your heart of all that which is foul, and basically being in the process of cleaning your heart, the tazkiyah process, of course. So of course, within that process, your prayer is of utmost importance, and your relationship with the Quran is of utmost importance. So can you share with us your analysis or your thoughts about keeping a balance between focusing on cleansing your heart and on working towards the practical steps that you have in mind when working towards your vision?
Look, I think I think it's just really important to make sure that we have whatever the situation is, that we're taking time out. Obviously, the prayer forces us to do that anyway as a minimum. But taking time out from our environment. But this is what the wisdom is of the prayer, I think. One of them, that it forces us to be in isolation from interaction with others, and gives us a space in which we can be with our Lord and express the sort of, all of the important and fundamental kind of truths, and give us a place to then, recommit ourselves, ask for guidance, and hopefully be a bit more energized, stronger, have more perspective before we then go on. Now, anything then which is similar to that in what it allows us to do, meaning even if it is just being in quiet isolation, reflecting, remembering, and thinking, I think just giving ourselves the time to reflect and to think about what has taken place, and what we've learned, so that we can move on with some kind of clear learnings and stuff. I often say, within a day, just, even if you can give yourselves 15 minutes, half an hour, whatever, right? Or within a week, just to carve out almost like a meeting time with yourself, if you like, and schedule that as well. Or a day in the month when you're just out, a different environment, just giving yourself to kind of the opportunity to reflect and to think and plan your way forward. So I think these breaks are very important in order to, and Salah in many ways is like that. I think, Salah, I think in many ways, depending on the lens you want to see it through, if you look at Salah in the context of an overall mission-driven life, Salah in a way provides a sense of like a break, an opportunity for connection, to re-energize, sort of reinvigorate yourself, basically, to then, before you then stop and then carry on, pursuing the goals that you have. And that's a perspective which I think over time has become clearer to me, I think. which is that sometimes, you know, is that, you know, it's possible to see, like, when we say salah is the most important action,
Yeah.
then what's, or then it's easy for someone to forget that, yes, okay, it's the most important action, but actually it's the foundation that's supposed to enable more actions, you know, meaning it's a foundation that actually enables, we say it's a pillar as well, right? Well, it's a pillar, then there's something to be built upon it.
Yes.
So the question is, what's our salah allowing us to do or helping us to do,
Yes.
you know?
Yes.
And then this sort of, if you like, this a life of, you know, of mission, of leadership, etc., is actually what that is. And again, there's so many Quranic verses that you give it a sense of that sort of integrated sort of way of seeing the prayer and the rest of your life, you know? Yeah. You know what it is? Like, I know you're asking a lot of finding the balance questions, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, with these things, I think that the balance will reveal itself, you know, in a way. Like, I don't think you can almost preempt, say, this is the balance. I think, like, in answer to this question, for example, like you keep pushing and you keep going and doing something until you realize that you don't have the necessary skills or knowledge to take things to the next level, in which case you're either going to upskill yourself or you're going to bring people on around you who have that, whatever you're looking for or you need. You just need to have enough of that humility and determination at the same time. So you're determined to achieve a certain outcome, you keep pushing towards that outcome, but you have enough humility to realize when things are going wrong, when there are gaps, you know, when there's how to respond to kind of criticism or feedback or whatever. And then to realize that either you need to change yourself, the way you're doing something, what you need to learn, know, skill you need to have, or you need to, you know, or bring people on with the various, you know, with the expertise. So it's kind of like combination of doing, like, I think you learn a lot of what's needed by doing stuff. And then you accordingly can, you know, and yes, you can preempt certain things. I might not have this skills, those is, you know, etc. But I think that, you know, experience is often the best teacher, and it also teaches you, you know, where you need more education from different sources, perhaps. But I think that's really what it is, and then the balance reveals itself.
Yeah. Okay. I like that.
The question is, like, you know, we've all got huge gaps in knowledge, right, for all sorts of things. The question is, have you got the knowledge and understanding or the skills to do the thing that you said you want to do? Well, you're only really going to know, I think, once you really get into it. And no, there might be for certain things, you know, certain particular qualifications, certain clear pathways of knowledge. Fine. I would say, even whilst doing the learning and the studying, always be a practitioner, essentially. Always be a practitioner. Or the integrated way term, which, you know, is a term which isn't commonly used, but it's a term I was, you know, informed about some time back, which is this idea of we should all be pracademics, you know? So essentially we be practical. We have an academic sort of view in the sense, or approach in the sense that we're interested in learning and knowledge and, you know, understanding. And we would therefore read and we study and do these things, starting with the Quran itself and anything and everything else that's helpful and relevant. But not for the sake of it. You know, it's for the sake of doing. So, you know, and we know this anyway, right? Like, this is just the idea of ilm and amal integrated.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Thank you very much. Appreciate the reflections. Basically, to go towards wrapping up the podcast. As you know, the target audience are the Muslim professionals, and we've discussed a lot of themes or important themes regarding developing the vision. What's some parting advice you want to leave the Muslim professionals with regarding the topics we just discussed?
Well, you know, I kind of summarized my core message really nowadays is you know, is in 3 short sentences. Prepare for the last day, live as a true believer, strive for God's cause. And for me, so far anyway, in my own journey, like, all of life's important advice is contained within these sort of 3 statements, I think. You know, and taking each one briefly, preparing for the last day is all about really being able to put everything in this world in its kind of true place and in its perspective. Preparing for the moment when we need to, you know, account for ourselves, justify ourselves, etc. Always keeping that in mind, and spending each day preparing for it, you know, because obviously we don't know when our last day in this life will be, which is essentially on an individual level when the last day, capital L, capital D begins really for each person. Living as a true believer, because we have to appreciate there's a difference between being a Muslim, someone who, yes, they submit, but they've almost just like they've joined the club, but not necessarily training, if you want to say it like that. So it's like that. So being a true believer has certain qualities, characteristics. It's like we're really interested in truth and in realizing our potential, and part of that is this idea of striving for God's cause, without which one cannot fully live as a true believer according to what Allah Himself says. And so the idea is that we understand Islam is a cause, it's a mission, and that it means bringing people back to God and bringing people back to all that is good and beneficial for them in this life and the next, and to help them then have that perspective. Because one of the quotes we share in the course is the idea that the leader is one who goes the way, who knows the way, goes the way, and shows the way. So this nicely integrates the idea of knowledge, the idea of action, and the idea of concern for others, which is essentially what the whole prophetic, the approach of all the prophets was. And so something it's worth us really thinking about. So always, I always tell people that just be self-critical. Don't assume that whatever you're doing right now is the best thing you can be doing. You should always be thinking about, what the optimal and the ultimate kind of contribution that we can make really is, and be prepared for your whole life to be a journey of discovery. And I think it's about approaching life with that curiosity and seeing we should all see ourselves as puzzles that need solving as well, and that just keeps going until hopefully you get to a state of, a settled state where we're still pushing and stuff, but we feel like we've really dug deep within ourselves to find out, who we really are and what we're here for, not just on a general level, but on an individual level.
Appreciate it very much. I think that's a very good wrap up of the main themes that we discussed. Thank you very much for your time, Iqbal. Appreciate it very much. And to all the listeners, I hope to see you, or I hope to have you on in the next episode. Thank